The Fanboy, episode 130. Hi everybody, Mario Francisco Robles, MFR here with you, and this is episode 130 of the Fanboy Podcast. How's everybody doing out there? So look, this week's episode is going to be all about the Snyder Cut has come out, now what? And I'm going to be bringing on ScreenRant's Stephen Colbert to discuss that. He's done a lot of amazing reporting over the last few years about the release of the Snyder Cut campaign itself. And now that we're kind of moving into the restore the Snyderverse end of that campaign, I thought it would be fitting to bring Stephen on to discuss, the likelihood of that happening, the comments earlier this week from Ann Sarnoff of Warner Pictures. There's a lot to discuss. So Stephen will be coming on in a bit for that, but for non-Snyder Cut related information that we could discuss for now is this week there were a couple of big castings that I want to touch on before getting into that chat with Stephen. So remember last week, unfortunately, I was made a liar. Last week, I mentioned that Billy Crudup is expected to, was at the time set to return in the Flash movie. He would be, reprising his role as Henry Allen that he did such a wonderful job at in both the theatrical cut and Zack Snyder's Justice League. I mean, I believe it's the same performance both times. But either way, in both movies, his performance was terribly affecting, as limited as it was. And, right after I said that last Friday, they announced that Billy Crudup cannot be in the Flash movie, which is just a freaking killer. But now we know who's going to replace him. It's Ron Livingston, most known for Office Space. I really like Ron Livingston. So this casting to me, I feel like Ezra Miller and Livingston will be able to create some special scenes together. It's going to be weird, though, because I was really rather attached to Billy Crudup's portrayal and the chemistry that he had with Ezra Miller. But look, Ron Livingston is no slouch. He knows his way around. He's a veteran actor. And listen, I'm ready to see what Mr. Livingston brings to the role. And even if I am pretty damn sad that Billy Crudup will not be returning. Another bit of casting news that came out is that former James Bond himself, Mr. Pierce Brosnan, Mr. GoldenEye, is now going to be Dr. Fate. That's right, Dr. Fate of the Justice Society, which is set to appear in Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's Black Adam movie. Dr. Fate will be played by Pierce freaking Brosnan. So that was really big news. And then the last bit of big news is we're going to get a Suicide Squad trailer. And unfortunately, it might arrive before this episode comes out, because it's supposedly arriving on Friday, March 26th, which is when this episode comes out. But you see, I'm recording this on Thursday. So chances are that Red Band Suicide Squad trailer that James Gunn was teasing today, chances are that has made its way out and everyone's already reacted to it. I, for one, am very excited, and I'm also pretty surprised. Because a couple of weeks ago, somebody asked, when do you think we're going to see more from James Gunn's The Suicide Squad? And I thought, honestly, it wouldn't be until May. Because a lot of these HBO Max releases, they've only been promoting them in the last 2 to 3 months before their release. But here we are, March 26th, and they're going to release the Suicide Squad trailer, apparently, already. And you could argue, by the way, that all of these announcements are happening rapid fire and including the premiere of the trailer. You could argue all of that is happening to distract from what happened on Monday. What happened on Monday when 4 days after the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, 4 days after all kinds of sweeping positive buzz, favorable reviews, and ecstatic fan response, 4 days into that, there was an interview published in Variety that poured cold water over all of that. And you could argue that all of these announcements that came out were almost a way to sort of like cushion that blow and maybe distract from that blow and definitely to make up for it in some way. Because yes, we got Ann Sarnoff basically saying, hey, we don't care how much you liked Zack Snyder's Justice League. We are not continuing on. But here's news on The Flash. Here's news on Black Adam. Oh, and here's James Gunn's Suicide Squad trailer. All rapid fire on top of each other like that, you know? So you could argue that this is a little bit of damage control because, let's face it, they did a little damage on Monday. And Steven and I are going to get into that. So without further ado, here is my very long conversation. Long, I should say, very long, but very interesting and very insightful conversation with ScreenRant's Mr. Stephen Colbert. All right, so right now it is my absolute pleasure to bring here on the Fanboy for the first time and hopefully not the last time, ScreenRant's own Mr. Stephen Colbert. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing great, Mario. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I got to kind of start off by saying, like, you know, you're like ScreenRant's, like, mild-mannered Clark Kent type there with the glasses. You follow the information. You've been doing great work for years. And I'm going to start by just embarrassing you a little bit, all right?
Okay.
I'm going to put you on the spot. But listen, you know, I've had a bit of like a checkered run when it comes to like Snyder and his fandom and the whole release of the Snyder Cut campaign over the last few years. I've had times where early on, honestly, I was so put off with the way that they came at me for letting them know that the movie was being remade that I wanted nothing to do with anything Snyder for a long time. And when I would see that hashtag early on, you know, since a lot of my early interactions were with people who were very hostile and very mean and very negative, I was kind of put off. But you, sir, the stuff that you started to report on, the way that you would handle the information and process it and get it out to the world, suddenly through your reporting is where I kind of got re-engaged with the whole thing and decided, all right, you know what? There are good, men are still good. There are good people in that fandom, and I really need to start paying attention to this productive side of the campaign. And I honestly, I just need to let you know that your work really stood like head and shoulders above everything else I was seeing out there, Steve.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I always thought it was important that, like, obviously there's the necessity of like separating fandom from like the information. Like as you were saying, you'd report facts and people would like get upset by it.
Yeah, and so they think it's your personal opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of what happened to me was I got so sucked into, ironically, the notion that the movie was being remade and taken away from Snyder and being made lighter, and Whedon was totally redoing it and everything. I was very bought into the Warner Brothers narrative at that time, which was like counter to what you were reporting.
Yeah.
And really leaned into it hard all the way leading up to the Snyder Cut. And the second it came out, I was like, oh, that's not the way to handle this. You need to separate it's really hard to separate that kind of bias and to go back to the information and report that first and not let that stuff get in the way. And so that was kind of a really interesting kind of paths crossing there of me learning like, oh no, let's get the information first and then figure out, you know, after that, instead of there's a frequent tendency to kind of reverse engineer it, which
and also like honestly that came through a lot, because obviously like when we would speak in DMs and stuff, like it's obvious you are passionate about this stuff and you have a horse in the race and a vested interest, but you also wouldn't just run to publish any weird rumor you heard, and you weren't just like racing to like, oh, this fits my idea, my narrative, my story, my take, so I'm gonna just run to the press with this. Like, you know, you always had a very sort of patient and measured response to any bit of information that came out. Whenever and you know this, and now we're going to reveal it to the world, whenever there's like a weird, crazy rumor, I go straight to Steve and I'm like, all right, What's going on? What have you heard? Is this accurate? Because you have your ear to the ground on a bunch of stuff, but you have the discipline not to just blast it out there for clout. Because it's very easy to just take these little crumbs of information and make it sound like you have all this inside info and everyone needs to follow you, and so you handle it the right way. So I just wanted to once again.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for being exemplifying the best of what bloggers can do. Bloggers get vilified a lot in the last few years, but the work you've been doing makes us look good. So I just wanted to start everything off by letting you know that, all right?
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. So look, obviously the reason I brought you on was we got to talk about the fact that after all these years of waiting for the Snyder Cut and for, in general, the ins and outs, the backs and forths of finally getting here, the movie came out last week. And now it's like, now what? Where do we go from here, right? And earlier in the week when we were, thinking about having this conversation, there was still a great deal of optimism after those first 3 or 4 days of mostly positive coverage and critical consensus that was positive and great social media buzz and all of this energy around what? Even people who didn't love Snyder stuff in the beginning were like, I want to see more of this story. I want to see more of this. So we were all kind of riding this wave, and we were on the vodka stream, and Scott was really riding that wave of positivity. But then I'm kind of glad we didn't record the conversation earlier in the week, because then Variety comes out with this interview with Ann Sarnoff, which really kind of torpedoed everyone's enthusiasm. And I guess before we get into the actual just specific quotes, what was your gut reaction to that article coming out?
Ah, man, so many thoughts, but I think kind of the bottom line of it is anyone who is kind of involved in this industry, even if you're a fan, but anyone that kind of consumes the news without that kind of fanboy hat on all the time and pays attention to how all this stuff works, you kind of know how studios structure their rollouts and the way that they do press releases and everything, and they'll hold out casting information or trailers or press releases or whatever related to other movies that they're not trying to hype at any given time, because they want to make sure that they don't undermine whatever the current release is. And so leading up to the release of the Snyder Cut, it was very clear that Warner Brothers was not treating this as a movie that they cared about the performance. There were things the reveal
Put
that
it mildly.
Yeah, exactly. The information about Superman reboots and stuff was coming out a few weeks ahead of time. That's just a PR known. If this was not the Snyder Cut, someone would have gotten fired for that getting out.
Yeah, you're undercutting your product that's currently out on the market. Why would you undercut it?
Yeah, exactly. And so then for this to come out so close after the fact, well, not only that, but then also even before that, immediately after Wonder Woman 1984, obviously they followed that immediately with a sequel greenlight on the Monday following, which was it's one of those things that's so fast that you're this is not reactionary. This was prepared and held in order to give the appearance of being reactionary to make them look confident in the numbers. But then also there was that Walter Hamada profile there, where a unnamed DC executive referred to the Snyder Cut as a cul-de-sac or a story that goes nowhere. And also they talked about HBO Max being the place for spin-offs and shows, and not for their A-level content, which is very contrary to HBO Max's or to Warner Media's HBO Max strategy and what Jason Kilar wants to do with it. They want that to be to have content that's just as prime as movie theaters. They don't want it to be, you see the real stuff in movie theaters, and then if you want to see that Peacemaker spinoff, that's also cool, but you'll see that on HBO Max. And so just the way that Warner Brothers and Warner Media have been, there's almost a weird undercutting relationship there by its nature, in that you see it play out in the media in that way. And so then when you get to this interview with Ann Sarnoff, I'd say it was really weird, except for the fact that it's kind of par for the course, but where you are actively doing. I don't care about. We can talk about whether or not the Snyder Cut, if there's a future there, or all of that stuff separately. But just in terms of, there is a current release that you have marketed and HBO Max wants to use to drive subscriptions.
And they've spent a lot of money on too, like 50 to $70 million.
And so even if it's a one-off, even if they, there's no future in it, take all of those things into consideration, the fact remains that the reason that it exists fundamentally is because they believe it will drive subscribers to the platform. Mm-hmm. And so not only are they advertising to people who are interested in the Snyder Cut, don't subscribe because there'll be no more of this, but they're telling everyone who already subscribed and is currently watching it and enjoying it, there's not going to be any more of this. And like churn is such a big concern. And so even if that is like the official in the books plan, you slow play. I mean, look at how long they took to reveal that Affleck was no longer Batman. He was out. He was out for like a year and a half. Yeah, and they slow played it because they didn't want to ruin the brand.
Slow play this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's so weird and destructive towards and there's all this weird stuff too about like what is Warner Brothers and what is Warner Media. HBO Max is a Warner Media product, and Sarnoff is the Warner Brothers chairman, but she is responsible for getting content for HBO Max. And so while she is not like structurally in charge of the platform, she is in charge of like sourcing content for it. And so there's a lot of weird intricacies of like who's responsible for what. But I don't think that ultimately she is as responsible for HBO Max's performance so much as she is for just selling content to it basically as like a sister company. I gotcha. But it's the type of thing where you can't. It's really hard for me to imagine that like Jason Kylar, who is responsible for making sure that HBO Max has subscriber growth, is happy with that kind of talk happening, especially at like what is the peak of interest in the in the product.
It's so counterintuitive, right? Like especially in like the last 10 years where it's like everything gets a sequel, a spin-off, a prequel, and a musical adaptation. Mm-hmm. Fans are used to like, if we rally behind a thing, we're going to get a lot of it. You know what I mean? Like if it's a success, if everyone on social media is talking about it, if, like, why would you not give me the next part of this? And now here you have a whole like generation of people who are discovering Zack Snyder's Justice League, and you have a lot of people who weren't even inside the Snyder tent who are checking it out and going, whoa, this is actually pretty awesome. I'd love to see where this is going. There's been a lot of that.
Well, and also people going back and revisiting Man of Steel and BVS.
Yes,
and
which I plan on doing.
And saying, beforehand there are people that will watch it and say, whoa, this is better than I remember. Some of them were seeing the Ultimate Edition of BVS for the first time, and that's almost always even if they don't say it makes them love the movie, they do say that's definitely better.
It's definitely the better cut, arguably.
And not only that, but then after people see the Snyder Cut, a lot of them go back and watch them again, and there's a net positive effect that seems to happen with time, with rewatches, with additional releases. Yeah. Those movies have really glowed up a lot.
Yeah. And the weird thing is, it's like, here you have all these people now who are going to get this weird messaging too. It's like, oh wow, I found I saw this thing. It's really good. Everyone online is talking about it. It's got all these exciting teases and all these places that it's going to go. But now it just seems like no matter what, these people just refuse to give me a sequel. It's almost like it's this choice that they've made. Not that this thing bombed and fell on its face. It actually did really well by streaming standards, and it's this weird undercutting your own product that's on the market thing that I just don't understand.
Well, and normally also, once again, if you're talking about like the normal process of like information dissemination from the studio, the window, like the time frame that article was published is where you would normally put out like numbers, like box office numbers.
Yeah, how well it's streaming. Yeah,
and you're gonna say like, oh, it did, and they're gonna say, and usually it's vague and it means nothing, and it's gonna say it exceeded our expectations, and
the top streaming movie of the year.
Yeah, exactly. And you provide a bunch of metrics where it's number one, and of course you can find it. You say, oh, it was better than. It streamed better than all of these other ones and more minutes watched than this other one. It's like, okay, but I don't know. There's no way to know what any of that means. But instead of that, they put out this. And I think it's compounded by the fact that I think that it was less an interview and more a series of mini press releases.
Yes, everything felt very like, here's the
Packaged.
information that I rehearsed that has to be put out there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it feels very much like either they're not paying close enough attention or it was done too far ahead of time. But regardless, they're definitely not reading the room because the response to the Snyder Cut was, and without overstating it, like putting my fanboy brain on, it is like the third best received DCEU movie, I think. The first positively received Snyder DCEU movie. It's his highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes,
which is wild. Yeah.
And the general, I think it's probably fair to say the general reception to it says, if I knew this, what he was doing, I would have supported this from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Or wow, there's a lot of people who say I never cared about this. Now I want sequels. I think, and I don't know how strongly I can state that that's the case, but I do know I can say that it's consistent enough that like the value of the future of the DCEU through Snyder's lens skyrocketed, I think.
Yeah. Well, on top of that, but I also feel like it's contradictory, the message too, because we keep hearing multiverse, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're going to live in this, if we're going to create this dynamic now where there are alternate Earths and branching paths in the story, then why can't the Snyderverse be one of those aspects of the multiverse? You know what I mean? Like it doesn't
the whole
make
appeal
sense
of the multiverse. Like that's the way they sold it was. It'll allow us to like, and anyone that watched Fandom, that was the excitement was, whoa, you get Matt Reeves, you get James Gunn, you get Zack Snyder, you get Patty Jenkins, you've got the Muschietti's doing, like, you get all these different, like very different voices, and you've got, Todd Phillips' Joker, and all these drastically different things, and they don't have to all fit together, but maybe they will sometimes and not other times, but that's okay because we're getting all these great movies.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I don't even know what they're talking about now because this seemed totally contradictory to everything they said at Fandom.
It just doesn't jive. The messaging doesn't jive. Yes, we have all these platforms and we're working on all of this synergy and we want to give, every fan something to enjoy, but not these fans who have been campaigning for years and now, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's a little strange, and we're gonna
exactly. Well, once again, to say it so soon also makes it feel like a foregone. Like it doesn't. There is no performance that the Snyder Cut could have that would, like, for example, Wonder Woman 3 got that sequel green light on Monday. There was no universe in which that happened for the Snyder Cut.
Yeah.
There is no place in the multiverse where the Snyder Cut got a green light.
Just crazy.
Or where a sequel gets the green light on the Monday. But also that, like I said, I have no idea how far ahead of time this was prepared, but there was no, even as someone that disagrees with it, if I'm in WBPR, like I say no, just sit on it, just say nothing, and then just just pray and cross your fingers that whatever James Gunn delivers is so cool that people are like, you know what? Zack's doing Army of the Dead at Netflix. James Gunn is doing this awesome stuff with DC. We got the Snyder Cut. We'll be fine.
Yeah. But instead, they threw red meat at his base. Basically, they fired him up.
It was, and it was so befuddling is the word that I know people keep on using, but like so counter to how they should have handled it, that I would say it was a brilliant stroke of viral marketing. If it weren't for the fact that she put her name and face to the quotes. Yeah. Like if this was like it came out and it was like, ooh, an anonymous DC executive says whatever, and then all the fans freaked out and like, because I think the spoiler alert, the end of the story is today, the day that we recorded, Restore the Snyderverse trended well over 1 million tweets for the day. Wow. And that's without help, and that happened. That's how it got greenlit in the first place. Was released the Snyder Cut trended November 17th, 2019, with like 770,000 tweets, and that was over an entire day of very coordinated, very structured tweeting by fans. Snyder was dropping exclusive images. Affleck tweeted, Godot tweeted. Momoa was on Instagram.
That was all the game changer.
They pulled out all the stops, and they got 770,000. the impact of the Snyder Cut is that so many people are like, yes, I want more of this, that without any help or input from, I think like Ray Fisher and Ray Porter, who are like on Twitter anyway, tweeted it, but off of the backs of like, and this is, I think there may have been a plan, but it was not like a coordinated fans getting together and structuring this whole thing.
Like it was a grassroots campaign.
Exactly. And I think it's still going on now. I mean, it was at like 1.1 or 1.2 million tweets for Restore the Snyderverse. And that's not all it was either, because a lot of this is just organic. There's like blue checks that are tweeting it in their reactions to the movie. But then in addition to Restore the Snyderverse, you also had like Justice is Gray was trending, which is the black and white version of the movie.
Yeah.
Obviously like Snyder Cut and Zack Snyder's Justice League were trending. And then you also have what were people doing? Release the Snyderverse and Restore the Snyder Cut, I think. Like basically like every variation.
All these permutations.
So I don't know what like the total volume of Snyder adjacent hashtags were.
Well, but I mean, you just blew my mind though with that fact though with that bit of data about the fact that like that weekend where you have all these Academy Award winning, you have Ben Affleck, you have these big stars coming out. That only got 777,000 or so. Yeah. And here we crossed 1 million without anyone really
in less time.
In less time.
Yeah.
See, that shows you right there that interest in the Snyderverse, as opposed to dissipating, has only increased over time. They saw the movie,
and it's not just that the fans. People always use like the if you give a mouse a cookie thing with the fans, and they're like, "Oh, you're just appeasing toxic fans," and now they're just going to ask for more. Which that's related to the interview a little bit more, but I think that they, once again, failing to read the room, thought that people would assume that the only people that are interested are hardcore toxic Snyder fans. But the opposite of that happened. Lots of people, especially people who were like, I at one point after it came out, I searched in Twitter. I searched Snyder Cut. I was wrong as like my search term, and the number of people that are like, if I like so many people came out and said, if I understand now what these fans wanted, or Ray Fisher. Oh, I get what Ray Fisher is talking about now. I thought that he was just being whiny about getting his part cut, but he was done dirty. This was like not just like him losing a part, but like this is a culturally relevant part. This is a role that we needed to see in 2017. Yeah. This isn't just bad for him and his career, but like this is like we were deprived of something great. Yeah. As a and then in the behind the scenes stuff, and so there's so many people that not just are like, oh hey, this is a cool movie, I want to see more, but like, oh wait, I thought they were toxic, and yes, people handled it wrong, but I now know what they were fighting for, and I'm sorry for snarking about it so much. Yeah. And so to have that response, like that's PR you can't buy. I mean, Warner Brothers could not get people on board this train, and as they undermine it going up to the release, I mean, on the back of, out of pure artistic vision and brute force on the part of Zack Snyder, the internet basically did a 180 on the most mocked thing on the internet in recent years. And it's not Warner Brothers didn't do it. They tried to undermine it. And so they're served up this, like, here's this cinematic universe you've always wanted, and people are excited about it, finally, like on a silver platter. Yeah. And they like literally did nothing to curry that favor. And their response is, no, we refuse. Like it's just honestly, I mean, you said the word before, it's befuddling. Yeah. It's tone deaf and it's very strange. And I mean, look, there's a few places to go with this, and we're going to go into a few of them. Hopefully, I'm going to eat up a lot of your time today, Stephen. Yeah, that's fine. I want to go. Nice. I want to go into a few quotes from Ann Sarnoff, but I also, since you brought it up, I want to kind of stick a pin in this. I want to come back to it afterward. The whole idea of if I had known. Mm-hmm. I've been talking about this for the last few weeks, and even the last few months, in a sense, where it's like, if only they could have gotten their messaging in place to let audiences know what exactly it was that Zack Snyder was going for, and also kind of the fact that it was like a limited run. It was like it was going to be like he had like his 5 like what Nolan did, but saga bigger.
Yeah. Like if they could have somehow made it clear that this is basically just like a mini series, basically a limited edition story, that he's going to tell, I feel like people would have entered it with an open mind, but instead, all the press seemed to be that this is DC's answer to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So people are thinking, oh, so now this is supposed to be like the new gold standard for each of these characters that we're going to have to deal with for the next 10 to 20 years, and these are, the standard archetypes of these characters. But when they see what Zack was going for, where it is a little different, and it's a visionary sort of approach to it, with a very specific way that he wants to tell this story, with versions of these heroes that aren't necessarily the traditionally accepted kind, people freaked out. But I feel like if they had gone into it knowing that, no, this isn't Happy Meals, this is Todd McFarlane collectibles. You know what I mean? This is going for something a little more grown up, and that, all right, let's see what this is. But since they never made that clear, and it just kind of seemed like, oh, Marvel's just jumping, DC is just jumping to their Avengers movie already. You know what I mean? It gave this impression that they were like rushing, that they were scrambling to keep up, that they were trying to build something similar without, like properly building it, quote unquote, which who even knows what properly building it means. Yeah. But, I feel like if people would have just known what this was from the outset, if there could have been a way to market that, I feel like this would be a totally different conversation. We'd be in a totally different place. But do you think there's a way they could have conveyed that? I mean, I was going to do this later, but screw it. I'm just asking you now. Do you think there's a way they could have sold it?
I think 100% there was. This is something that I wrote like 2,500 words on this or something, so I'll try to keep the briefer version here, but you can find my article on ScreenRant.com called The Snyder Cut Proves That Warner Brothers Ruined Their Best Chance to Compete with Marvel, or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was kind of basically my headline. Yeah. But basically that's my first point there, is what you just made, was that there was this narrative. It was so persistent in the early days of the DCEU of they don't have a plan. They're just trying to catch up with Marvel. They're rushing it. They, whatever. And now anyone that is kind of, there's an exhibit in Dallas, Texas right now at an AT&T place where it's all a lot of the nightmare aesthetic stuff from and
the storyboards are out. Yeah,
exactly. And so you've got costumes, but also you have the storyboards that Zack Snyder put together. He charted out with Chris Terrio, and then it was the lettering on them was done. It was like basically their pitch, and the lettering was done by Jeff Johns, and then Jim Lee drew all the images that go along with it. And it's just like 7 or 8 whiteboards of story plan, breaking down the whole DCEU arc that he was building, and it was very meticulously. I mean, I would argue probably more meticulously structured than like what Marvel did.
Wow.
Because Marvel gets credit for like building up to Thanos.
Yeah, but a lot of it is reverse engineering too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you reference Thanos in a bunch of movies, and then at the end of the day, you're like, oh, we planned that the whole time. And it's like, well, no, he changed looks 3 times, and then you retconned everything about him in Infinity War and just gave a totally new story. That's great. I mean, I enjoyed Infinity War is one of my favorite movies. I think Thanos is a great character, so that's not to be so critical of them so much as like it worked.
But it wasn't obviously planned in advance.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not fair. Planned. And Marvel's very good about like 30 films down the line and being like, oh yeah, that kid in Iron Man 2, that was Spider-Man the whole time. It's like, no. A, how does that improve the story? B, no, it wasn't. And so there's this weird, Marvel became the gold standard of everyone needs to have a solo movie, which since when has that been the case in the history of cinema?
X-Men didn't do that. X-Men, and just in terms of superheroes, you know what I mean? Yeah. The X-Men had great success in the early zeros, and there was never solos.
Or just storytelling in general. You have these classic characters and huge archetypes, and Lord of the Rings didn't have any solo movies, or you have all that, like you can't kill off Gandalf in the first movie without doing a Gandalf solo movie first. Like, how are we going to care about him? It's like, well, that's storytelling. That's how you care about things, is by storytelling. And so obviously there's a debate over did they do a good job and all that, and we don't have time for that. And no one's ever going to agree anyway. But the fact of the matter is, there was a plan. There was always a plan. And for some,
nobody communicated it. For some reason, the public relations at Warner Brothers never sounded the alarm.
The only reason anyone even knew that these movies were coming was because on an investor's call, they were like, oh yeah, we're doing here's some movies we're doing that leading up to some Justice League movies.
Yeah, that slate that came out that people,
Exactly. And then you compare that to like what Marvel did, and Marvel got out and they did that event where they said we're doing Civil War, and then we're doing Guardians of the Galaxy and all these things leading up to, I think at the time it was Infinity War Part 1 and 2 or Infinity Gauntlet or whatever.
Yeah.
We knew what it was leading to, oh, this is all about Thanos and the Infinity Stones and the Avengers leading up to this massive event. And so what happens is then they say we're doing an Ant-Man movie, and nobody cares about Ant-Man. They're like, how does this fit into the plan?
Yes.
And so in the absence of DC doing that, everyone just assumes that, they bring in their Ant-Man movie or not that they have an equivalent, but I mean, they do something like that, and they say, well, the only reason they're doing that is because they're rushing it. It's like, well, now that you look back at like for example, people are like, all those dossiers and BVS were so rushed just to get those characters and they're set up for Avengers or set up for Justice League.
Yeah.
But now you look at that, that's like a main plot point of Bruce is tracking down these characters, metahumans based on these dossiers that Lex Luthor collected because he was he was paranoid about powerful people coming in and taking over the world from him, and it makes sense. But without them having like the closest thing DC would do to establish any sort of expectations, to me, always felt very much like, oh, hey, look, we've got superheroes too, or we're building up to a team up too. And so they kind of fed into that they're copying Marvel thing. Like they wanted people to think they were copying Marvel.
It's absurd. Like if they would have had people like Zack himself, or Deborah's a good communicator as well, like have people out front when these movies are about to come out, or and kind of announce the big thing. I'm telling this like 5-part story. It has a beginning, middle, and end, and we're going to go to all these places. I'm kind of basing it loosely on mythology, and it's going to be something you've never seen before.
This is Lord of the Rings with DC characters, not
exactly. You sell that to people, and all of a sudden they walk in. Okay, well, this isn't what I thought it would be, but let's check this out. But people kind of went into, again, it was this Marvel comparison of like, oh, so I got to see some traditional origin stories, and these are, just the expectations were totally off.
And then instead of, and it's so weird because like anyone who's like worked in sales knows that like setting expectations is the number one way to sell something, and that's what marketing is, right? It's setting expectations, and so when people would jump to the assumption of it has to be like Marvel, and say, well, there has to be origin stories first, and then you can't, you have to do all these other things according to whatever the plan is. They never, not only like did they never correct the expectation, but they made that expectation, like they would allow this expectation to be set for, here's how these movies should be, here's what the tone should be, they need to be funnier, they need to be shorter, they need to be whatever. And then instead of saying, oh, you misunderstand, here's what we're doing, they would go back to Zack and say, you're not doing it right, do it like these expectations have. It's like, no, your job is to set expectations. Like that's your job as the studio. And so then that's how you get Joss Whedon, the director of the Avengers, coming in to remake Justice League. So it's the most cynical, like bean counter, like only someone that only knows about movies from the perspective of a spreadsheet would ever say, get the Avengers guy on this, and it'll be like.
I mean, and that's something that I brought up last week. This movie, Zack Snyder's Justice League, really hits a lot of the marks that anyone who wants to make a movie would want. Like if you're running a film studio, you want something that generates this level of excitement. You want to do something that shows you a larger world and builds it out and gets people excited for sequels. And the only thing that this didn't really, like, by my guesstimation, didn't really deliver were like the happy meals, like the little, like if you wanted that 4-quadrant, it's good for little kids and it's good for grandma too sort of thing, fine. But it's like,
although I do know of little kids and grandmas that have been thrilled by it. Now, it is rated R, so I'm not going to volunteer everyone's little kids to watch it. Yeah. But that's not to say that it is absent of those things entirely.
No, of course. But when you Snyder's going out there going, this isn't for kids, and it's not your Saturday morning cartoons, and it's for adults. Like you could see how Warner Brothers or whoever would be like, well, but we kind of want to. Don't say that. Like, that's one area where you could see like the two sides are not really on the same page, or like they don't seem to want to go after that slightly more niche, like grown-up geek audience that Snyder's cultivating. It's this bizarre, tug of war between.
And if you look at him when he was before he left the movie, I think he played that game a lot more. where he would say like, "Oh no, it's still, I think it's a more mature approach, but I think it's still appropriate for, everyone's got to make their own decision or whatever." I
Yeah.
kind of feel like he leaned hard into this isn't for selling Happy Meals. There's no jokes in this or whatever, because speaking of setting expectations, he was making people brace themselves for that, like, oh, this is just going to be this grim, dark, horrendous, like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always remember that, like, Chris Terrio and Deborah Snyder and Zack himself, before BVS came out, and there was even this rewrite that happened to make it lighter, they were always saying, oh no, Flash is going to be, like, these other characters are going to come into this universe and make it lighter and make it funnier just by the nature of who they are as, like, this is Batman and this is Superman and this is what happens. This is what the world feels like when Batman and Superman fight. That's not a good feeling. So the world doesn't feel good when Batman and Superman fight, because you shouldn't feel good when Batman and Superman fight. And
now it feels like you're yelling at me. All right, listen, I had my issues, but I have a more open mind now. Jeez.
But then Flash is going to come, and he's a very different character. And Aquaman, he's got his own personality and whatever. And so I always thought it was funny that Snyder was leaning so hard into that, and didn't know if that was him having an opportunity to do his own thing or what. And then it came out, and I was like, oh no, he was basically trolling everyone to say, like, this is going to be the darkest thing ever. And then it comes out, and it's like, oh no, Flash, like, in the middle of a slow-mo scene, stashes a hot dog in his pocket to feed to it, like.
It's got, yeah.
But it's not a cheesy, like, it doesn't undercut the emotion. And in fact, when you get to the end of the scene, you find out, like, oh no, yes, it was funny, but also that was a strategic, like, he needed to have that hot dog as a part of his plan to explain. I feel like
Snyder does. He likes to challenge you, though, because he wants you to go, what the hell's the deal with the hot dog? Right. He wants you to have that, like, what? That 2 minutes later, oh no, there was a reason for that. Okay, all right, sorry. You know what I mean? Like, I swear he almost takes that stance. He
loves subverting expectations.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But hang on, see, I keep wanting to get to these Sarnoff quotes, but then I think more and more about all this. Okay, let's get to the Sarnoff quotes, because there's a lot more to discuss. But since we are here, when it comes to, like, their future, a lot of this has to do with, like, the connectivity of the branches, and she's very high on this approach of, like, everything used to be very siloed, now everything's going to be much more cohesive, and yada yada yada. So I'm going to read you a couple of quotes she had about where they're going. And then I want to get your thoughts on that. And then we're going to get into some of the more controversial stuff she said. But for now, in terms of where we're going, she says, we've got an incredible group of creators, television series creators, Max series creators, feature film creators, who are basically broadening the base of the talent that we work with on DC, because we're so excited about the potential to build out the DC multiverse, which again apparently means as long as it's not Snyder. It's one of the reasons why I was hired almost 2 years ago. The before and after was a very siloed organization with no connectivity between the businesses. DC was being developed, but in a kind of monolithic way in each division. My mantra coming in was to make it bigger and broader, and we really want to surprise and delight the fans with more connective tissue across the various media and platforms. I'm talking movies, HBO Max, television, and our games division. So let's just kind of start there. Like, what do you think of this messaging? What do you think of this idea of it's? Does this get you excited?
Not well. It's so weird to, like. It's a lie, I guess. Maybe I should start with saying, I don't know. I always try to. I'm like, how do I say this like the most, like, without taking too hard of a stance?
Yeah.
But that's bogus, because the movies were not siloed like that before she came in. They were already doing multiple things. Joker was in production, and Shazam was in production, and Birds of Prey was in, like, they were doing all these different things with the movies already. And like the idea of using the Flash to do some sort of multiverse Flashpoint time travel thing, Rick Famuyiwa was going to do that already, like under Snyder. Like, that's not new. DC Universe was doing Titans and Swamp Thing, and those were different tonally. And then Doom Patrol, which once again is different tonally, and those didn't link up with the Arrowverse which is all Berlanti. Speaking of not having just one creative voice, they give Berlanti all the TV stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess they are okay with one creative voice. But then what happened to that? Like they canceled Swamp Thing because it wasn't close enough in tone to like the other Arrowverse stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a great. It was like the most unique kind of superhero show out there in terms of tone, and like I love what they were doing with that. And so to suggest that like there was this monolithic approach, like I will agree, like maybe there's disorganization and a need for a plan when she came in. So that's not to say that there wasn't need for work to be done, but there was not. It feels very much like gaslighting to say like, oh, before I got here, it was all Snyder's way all the time. It's like, well, he was long gone by the time she came in, and even under him, it wasn't, a singular creative voice from him.
Yeah. And she has more to say on this. And then also said, creators want to have franchises that are larger than life, but oftentimes you start working with a company and that company has discrete divisions. So you become a film creator, you become a television creator, and never the twain shall meet. My role is to pull people together towards a vision that can make the whole more than the sum of its parts. One of the key aspects of that is having a long-range plan. These movies and TV series can take 2+ years to make, so if you're not planning out and bringing other people into the plan, that further accentuates the silos. It's having the plan, and then it's having the strategy where all the various businesses work in harmony to create the plan. It seems logical, but it's very rarely done well. One of the things that I said to the group early was never let your fans see your org chart, and boy, could the fans see our org chart in 2019. I mean, can I just say, before you respond, I feel like, again, it's funny, I have like a Nintendo connection to this, where like there was this time like a bunch of years back where all the big companies were putting out their next gen consoles and they were showing off all the horsepower and all the amazing things they're going to do. And Nintendo was hell bent on going, but no, we're going to keep everything lo-fi, but we have connectivity. You could play your Nintendo on your DS also, and there's functionality. It's like, you're not speaking to me. You have this idea, but you're not hearing me. You're trying to sell me on this other thing when I'm asking you for something else, so that it just seems very sort of tone deaf to me. And also I will add though, some of this, and tell me what you think, some of this almost feels like it might have come to them from J.J. Abrams. And I say that because when he went over to Paramount, I remember reading stories that he was really hoping to be able to do the Star Trek movies as well as TV series. And then he discovered that it's actually like separate entities and that they don't have the rights to the TV stuff. And he was sort of like over that. Like that was an upsetting aspect of it for him. I feel like part of the Bad Robot entering Warner Brothers fray was he probably also like demanded like, well, we need to have synergy across all departments. Did you ever hear that about Abrams?
I've heard that specifically about him at Warner Brothers. Actually, I wasn't as familiar with his Paramount background.
Yeah,
but I mean, they've bet very big on Abrams, and I don't know how much of it is like demands being made by him necessarily. But I've heard a number of times is that they want to make Abrams happy. And I know that he's interested in doing things like Superman and all that.
Yeah.
So that doesn't shock me at all to hear that. So I mean, it's sort of hearsay, but it lines up with what you're saying about his history is. So I thought I'd mention it.
And then, okay, another quote that I wanted to get to from Ms. Sarnoff, which is with regard to listening to the fans and all that sort of stuff, but also how like they're shifting their approach a bit. She said, "We're always going to listen to our fans, but we are in service of the broadest fan base, and we owe them an integrated, holistic strategy. We are the shepherds of the franchise, and hopefully when the fans see what we've got in store, they'll know that DC is in good hands across many different platforms with many different creators. We want different voices in the mix. For certain fans that want singular voices, they may be disappointed, but we would ask them to be patient and see what we've got in store, because perhaps the newer voices in the mix will have you're shaking your head, will have just as compelling stories to tell. On balance, you of course want to listen to your fans, but we do want to stay true to our vision and our mission for DC and build that out. So I feel like the big one here is that juicy little, for certain fans that want singular voices, they may be disappointed.
Yeah.
What did you think of all that?
Well, once again, I got to approach it from a few different angles, and like, so first of all, taking off the fanboy hat and even taking off like the journalist hat, like looking at this in terms of as a like a marketing or a PR statement. You don't don't ever tell your fans they're going to be disappointed. Like that's a rule. Like I'm so confused reading this entire thing about who crafted it and who advised on it and like who reviewed it, because it's breaking all these rules about like, and not in a like rebellious like maverick way, but in a like, never say you might be disappointed. Say what you should look for. Like, don't like, they're saying that we have a plan, and they're saying no,
and
we're
it may
not
be what you like, but give us a chance.
Yeah, but like, where's the plan? They've been saying they have a like. There is no plan. There was a plan under Snyder, and then they canceled that, and then they've been saying that they're going to build a plan for years now. It sounded like they had maybe not a plan, but a excuse to not have a plan with the multiverse that sounded kind of exciting and like it would work as a kind of chaos concept. And now they're once again saying like, oh, we've got a plan, and we won't tell you what it is. We will tell you that you'll be disappointed, but we hope that you'll be patient because it will pay off, but we can't tell you why it'll pay off. Like, it's
a baffling
I can't
interview, Steven.
Like, I'm not joking. People should be fired for this. like
whoever okayed these quotes, it makes no sense.
And the closest thing that I can think of that frankly makes sense, in which case it's a, once again, taking off my fanboy hat, is if what they said was, you know what, Snyder fans are stopping us from doing what we want to do. We need to just tell them to screw off, and to say we're not gonna provide what you want. And so if that's, follow him to Netflix, we don't want you anymore. Get out of here. This is very effectively doing that. And if they decided, you know what, the loss of trashing them and getting rid of them is acceptable if it means that we can do whatever we want to do without having to deal with these hashtags all the time or whatever.
Yeah.
Then it's an acceptable loss. And maybe strategically I can understand that, but even so, once again, read the room. You're no longer dealing with this vocal minority of people who are just kind of making noise on Twitter. This is now like Snyder won people over to his vision. Snyder convinced people he was doing the right thing right before you decided to say nope.
And listen, for those of us too, by the way, who like have a weird relationship with Snyder's films, seeing this movie and getting sold by it feels like jumping on the train just as it stops running. You know what I mean? It's like, I just got on and we're not going anywhere. Okay.
And I think I've mentioned the term gaslighting a handful of times also, because it feels like very literally in the way that there's a lot of things that are said in here, like when she talks about some fans might want a singular creative voice. And there's like a lot of projection in there that is not, yes, there are some Snyder fans that want him to do everything and have only his voice exist, and that's wrong. But it's such a minority. Most people who like want to restore the Snyderverse, for example, aren't saying cancel Suicide Squad and cancel the Flash and all this.
Also,
they're saying, hey, we're doing the multiverse. Awesome, finally. Like, actually, most Snyder fans that I know, when they knew that the Snyder Cut was coming and they knew the multiverse was coming, they're like, this is perfect. Now we can get these Snyder movies, and these haters aren't going to feel like it's their job to tear it down, because we can coexist. You can have we can have a Henry Cavill, Zack Snyder Superman at the same time as we have another Superman, and everybody can be happy.
Just like we're going to do with Batman in next year.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of what was going on, and now they're taking that away and saying like, oh no, everyone could have been happy, but now we're only going to service one side of this. And once again, why does this even need to be said?
And it feels arbitrary. Again, if you're saying that like we want to work with a wide range of filmmakers and across a wide range of things, then why would you shut out one of those?
And why does this
artists
need to come out at all? Or why does it need to come out? Like, what if they just said nothing? What, I don't know, what did they need to stop from, like, they needed to nip it in the bud before people are, like, hashtagging the Snyder Cut stuff for James Gunn's, like, that's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
But,
well, like, for me, also, like, the last bit of contradiction there is also, like, multiverse implies infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
But everything she's saying here is about how interconnected everything is going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like,
or she's saying,
which
like,
is it?
She'll say, yeah, the multiverse, and we want diverse voices, but we don't want to have this diverse voice. And it's so, yeah, it's not only contradictory with what they've said in the past or what their kind of strategy we thought was, but with from sentence to sentence, it's contradictory. And then once again, with like the gaslighting of saying some people want one creative voice and we're not going to do that, or, you know, some people want this, or this is what we've done in the past. It's like, that's not what it was in the past. That's not what people are campaigning for. That's not what people are wanting. It feels like the target audience for this is like the people who, if you see on Twitter, like there'll be a trailer that'll come out for, like what, you know, let's say like for Suicide Squad or something will come out. And someone on Twitter that like doesn't follow movie news will be like, oh, until they get away from this Snyder grimdark, that I'm not. And it's like, he's got nothing to do with this anymore.
Nothing.
But there's some people that don't know, and so it feels like maybe they were like catering this whole thing to those people. But I think that's an even smaller minority than Snyder fans. It's like you're not. There's no one to win over with this. It's baffling, befuddling is
hashtag befuddling. I'm gonna read you the last quote about this, and then we'll discuss some more befuddling things. But here's the last thing she said, specifically when asked about you know, if we're going to continue, because now people are tweeting restore the Snyderverse, and she said, I appreciate that they love Zack's work, and we are very thankful for his many contributions to DC. Arya, we're just so happy that he could bring his cut of the Justice League to life, because that wasn't in the plan until about a year ago. With that comes the completion of his trilogy. We're very happy we've done this, but we're very excited about the plans we have for all the multi-dimensional DC characters that are being developed right now.
Once again, throwing words in there, like as if his characters weren't multi-dimensional.
Yeah,
like it's just it's you can read, like, I react very strongly to things when I can see puppet strings.
Yeah.
And this is something where, like, I can see a puppet string attached to every single thing she says, and it's opaque. It's or I shouldn't say opaque. It's transparent. They didn't do a temperature. They didn't read the room. There's just so many. Like, and you know what she's trying to say and who she's trying to say it to, but it's like passive aggressive. And this is the chairman of Warner Brothers Pictures. Yeah. Like, even like look at Star Wars and like how much insanity goes on with Star Wars fans, like the fandom menace and stuff. And like even Kathleen Kennedy doesn't come out and say,
she doesn't come out and talk about
and say this stuff. You know what? And they're fine. They've got like an insanely toxic, like very organized, very vocal section of their fandom that like commands way more sway than Snyder fans do, that causes all sorts of problems, and spread they bully Kelly Marie Tran off of Twitter or off of Instagram and stuff like that. That's a very problematic group in way different ways than Snyder fans are, or like the bad Snyder fans are. But like even they don't feel like there's any benefit to be had from coming out and saying like, you're never going to be happy with our movies. So
And listen, and like, if I'm reading this, right, because Variety has a very, far reach. It's not just like people who read comicbook.com or Den of Geek. Like this is like people, serious people read Variety. And if I'm a serious person who happened to see Zack Snyder's Justice League, or if I heard all my friends talking about it or my kids talking about it and it's all over social media, and I mean, I guess for the scenario I'm about to point out, I guess I have to have seen it. So let's say I've seen this movie. I'm excited for it. It ends on sort of a cliffhanger. It drops all these hints about places we're going to go next. And now I'm just excited to find out, all right, so where are we going from here? This quote saying, with that comes the completion of his trilogy. That doesn't sound right. That would sound right if the movie I just saw was clearly the end of a story. But this is not that. So unless you're going to address, well, then why are you deciding to not continue this story? That's like the elephant in the room. You know, and it's like you said, it makes it seem like no matter how well this thing performed, no matter what happened, they were going to say this. But it's like, you're calling it the completion, but this story in no way presents itself as the end of the story. So you got to justify calling it the completion. Why is it the completion?
Which is why I say it feels like it's passive aggressive, and I feel like people who are reading it read it as passive aggressive too. Because even if you're someone who is not that familiar with that, and you read that and you're like, why are they like she's pushing a narrative here? Yeah. Why is she pushing? What narrative is there to push? And once again, why does this need to come out the Monday after this movie comes out? Like
it feels shrewd and cynical and strange.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's one aspect of this, actually. Like, you know, if we can remove all the weird puppet string stuff, and we can remove how Ann Sarnoff seems to not be the best messenger for this weird message she gave us. Something did kind of dawn on me the other day, though, as I was thinking about this a little more, which was there's a way to look at this news, though, as in a way it's what people were asking for years. Because if you recall, there was a lot of concern around the fact that DC directors had like no control over their movies, and the studio was micromanaging everyone, and everything had to fit, you know, I mean, you know, in theory, like everything had to fit the way they wanted it to be. And now we're doing this thing where all these creators just get to create in their own sort of pockets, and they can expand on their worlds, and they could have, you know, Matt Reeves can make a TV series about Gotham PD, and James Gunn can make The Peacemaker. And in general, like the filmmakers seem to have the ability now to really kind of let their imaginations run wild and build out their worlds. So I guess just another way, huh?
Except for Zack Snyder.
Except for Zack, which again, that's the bizarre thing. But it's like, in terms of this approach, you could argue that like after everyone found out about the atrocities of 2016, where they, you know, they took over the BVS and chopped off a half hour, or where they did what they did to David Ayer's Suicide Squad, you know, after all that, and then especially in 2017 with what happened with Zack, with Joss Whedon, there was all of this concern about like the directors who work on DC films are getting hamstrung by these powers that be.
Right.
So you could argue now that they're taking more of this approach where like all the creators kind of get to create and build out their own pocket universes, and we're going to, you know, we're just going to help the synergy happen for them. You know, you could almost argue that this is part of what we wanted, right?
In a way you could. And I think that's a really good point, that it raises some additional problems, but also maybe tells me where this would have been the best place in time to say this. Is that I think you make a good point about how they have problems with the past, but because of the angling on this, because she also says, no, we're not developing the Ayer cut, which once again, why say that definitively? Yeah. Which also, like, none of that even matters, because they already said, like they said numerous times, the Snyder Cut didn't exist and the Snyder Cut wasn't going to be released, which once again, speaking of like gaslighting their audience.
Yeah. Yeah, they've been at this for a while. They got a head start.
And then, but it's almost like victim blaming Snyder and Ayer, by positioning it as if they were being like held hostage by a single creative vision from them, where, like, per your point, a lot of the problems that arose from them was because of studio interference and creatives not being able to create. And so to get out of that era and to get the Snyder Cut out and treat that as like finally we're free of Snyder, now we're no longer going to have those problems, was like, no, Snyder was the victim of those problems, and now you're kicking him to the curb as if he was causing the problems.
Just as you figured out how to let people do their thing, you're kicking him out of them.
And if we're going to say, like, okay, let's say all these things are necessary to say in some capacity, what would have been the smart way to do it would be wait until after the Suicide Squad comes out. Presumably that's going to be good. I think I'm excited for it. I think it looks like it's going to be really exciting. You know, James Gunn, I think, has a pretty good track record with doing this kind of stuff. I think the studios put a lot of weight behind it. So the Monday after the Suicide Squad comes out, you come out and give a very, you don't do this yet. You're quiet between the Snyder Cut and the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad comes out. Between now and then, Army of the Dead has come out. People are excited about Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead universe over at Netflix. Sure, there's Snyderverse stuff still percolating because people are curious and excited. But you're on the high of, oh, this is what the post Snyder Cut universe looks like, and you come out and you give a very similar interview where you say, we're so excited. This is what the future of the franchise. You don't need to say we promise we have
Make
a plan.
it as
you say,
part of a victory lap on your next.
Instead
chapter.
of coming out and smashing a success. Instead of diminishing what is hot, you come out and you say, we're glad everybody loved the Suicide Squad. You can expect a lot more of this kind of creative vision and freedom from other directors. And then if somebody says like, well, the Snyder Cut was a big deal, you can do more of that. Be like, you know what? We've got so many hot things. We know we're thrilled. People are excited about the Suicide Squad. We're going to continue to pursue that. There are no Snyder projects in the works right now.
Be vague, be coy.
Exactly. And then just like, and I always tell writer like scoopers the same thing online is that you get these wars on Twitter about who's right and who's wrong. It's like, look, the facts are going to come out eventually. If you're right, if you are in the right, no need to fight anybody and like be on the record for saying nasty things in a fight. Just put out your info and then quietly wait, and then you'll be proven right eventually, or you'll be proven wrong eventually.
Yeah.
But now she's on record saying all this stuff, and so like, what does it mean if? So now she is public enemy number one for the million people who are tweeting that they want more Snyderverse.
Yep.
And if they renege on that claim that there's not going to be any more, her name and face is on that instead of a nameless executive. Like, I would say that's her job, right? If she has stated in an interview, like, my job is to not let this happen, and then they decided to go reverse on it, that's basically, I would, like, you leave the company bizarre. Then, right? Like, I don't know.
And you got to think about it like a promoter. Like, to pull out another weird comparison, I brought in video games before, Nintendo, and I'm going to bring in wrestling. Because, like, Vince McMahon always lives by the mantra of never say never. You never know what's going to happen. And because, because even if, like, there's, like, let's say we're still sticking with, like, wrestling and stuff, but, like, they'll ask him, like, will a certain controversial wrestler ever be back in the company or whatever after they burnt the bridge? And he never says no. It's always, well, we'll see. You never say you never say never in this business.
Yeah.
And I feel like as a promoter, as a business person, you got to play this in a way that kind of teases people to stick around, even if you're not planning. This weird just throwing the cold water on everyone in the middle of this victory lap is just perplexing and befuddling.
Yeah. But unless you're trying to get rid of a certain segment of your audience, which I think is probably the last part of her quote that you wanted to talk about, I'm assuming.
Yes. In terms of, because the issue of toxic fandom has come up, and it's funny because you and I have both had our run-ins with portions of that toxic fandom within the Snyder fandom. We have some of the same fans, you and I. We have some of the same groupies, even. So we've had our run-ins with the screen grab militia, who likes to come with the threats and all, and they harass and they come after every social media post by anyone, even if it has nothing to do with DC, is just filled with slander and all this stuff about, their hashtag that they're campaigning for. Yeah. And there have been, reports of death threats, and there's been all kinds of like legitimately stressful, ugly, nasty things. And I guess, since you're sort of uniquely positioned too, where like, I consider you deeply within the campaign and the Snyder fandom and all of that, but you're completely separate from the people who handle it that way. And I guess as we move into this next phase, if there is, it sounds like today there was with 1 million Restore the Snyderverse tweets. It seems like we're already sort of rounding the corner into an all new sort of, campaign here. And I guess as we go into that, what do you think is the best way to campaign for the restoration of the Snyderverse? What do you think?
I think the perspective that I took, back before the Snyder Cut was even announced, I always said that when the Snyder Cut is announced, I assumed something would happen eventually, but I always said Part 2 and Part 3 would never happen.
Mhm.
And then after seeing kind of the way things stood when it was announced, I said, you know what? Everything is on the table, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and um, as people tend to ask me about this stuff as we come like to the release, how many views does it need? You know, what numbers are they looking for in order to like? And who knows?
Yeah.
Obviously, it didn't matter how many numbers
Yeah,
they
it
had. They were
seems
going to come
like
out
no
and say
matter
this
what.
anyway.
Yeah.
So that stuff is always hard to answer. But the one thing I did say was that um, the Snyder Cut was a very unique situation where Zack shot 100% of principal photography, and he was in post production up until like 6 months before the movie was supposed to be released. You know, there's a lot of the movie done at that point. A lot of argument about how done is that, how much funding would it need to be done, whatever, and that was the source of a lot of fighting on the internet over like the definition. And you were one of the first ones I appreciated you pointing this out. There's no definition of done. What does done
Yeah.
mean? What does exist mean? Some people would say it doesn't exist, and what they mean is there's not a 100% complete cut that is done. And then fans would say, well, nobody's saying there's a 100% cut that's done. We're just saying it's close enough. But then
Yeah, and
another
that was the
fan
thing.
would
No one,
say,
everyone was having two different conversations. Some
yeah,
people were having the "does it exist," and some people were having the like the "it" was up in the air. Is
yeah,
the "it" is a finished, finalized, ready to go release thing, and that's what people were saying. No, that does not exist.
yeah.
But the actual rough cut obviously existed. And it was the most baffling thing that people were still fighting about that for years afterward. Sorry,
Yeah.
you brought that up.
No, yeah, and it was extremely frustrating. Well, and speaking of like the kind of toxicity that you and I got was very much related to our interpretation of like where what exist meant and where it was in that process.
Mhm.
Um, but the bottom line was that the state of the cut um, did not need a full movie budget to complete.
Mhm.
It ended up needing about $70 million. That's another thing that I think is kind of dishonest. People say like, okay, so you add that on to the theatrical budget, now you got $370 million. Like, no,
No,
no, no,
it's ridiculous. It's
no.
different bank accounts.
Yeah, exactly. They closed that movie came out. They closed the books on it, put it away. The company got bought by AT&T, Warner Media. They gave Snyder $70 million to make a movie using archive footage and added some stuff to it. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, sure, this movie benefits from the budget of the original movie, but it is as far as their accounting goes, this is a $70 million movie that
Yeah.
happens to have the production value of a $300 million movie. Which,
Yep.
once again, how do you say no to that? That was the thing that I was saying leading up to it, is you can't say no to that, and obviously they didn't.
Yeah.
But the ask for that, even if you're asking for $40 million or $70 million or whatever it's going to cost, you can have you see these fan campaigns will get TV shows renewed or whatever, because the dollar amount that you're talking about there is a lot easier to monetize. Now, the movie is out, that's done. Now we're talking about Justice League 2 and Justice League 3. The ask for that is re-sign Ben Affleck, re-sign Henry Cavill, re-sign, whoever all is in the cast, free up space in everybody's schedule. Affleck's schedule
On
is
top of what some of these people are already doing, because some of them are already in
yeah,
other movies, right? Like Ezra Miller, and there's going to be an Aquaman 2, and there's going to be a
yeah, exactly.
Wonder Woman 3.
So there's contracts, there's scheduling, and then you're going to need a $300 million budget, $250 million budget, whatever, which the size of the Snyder Cut campaign was not, I don't think, is not sufficient to get that ask. It doesn't have that kind of pull. That's not to say it doesn't have pull. I always compared it to, are you familiar with the story of Gideon from the Bible?
No.
It's the short version is basically that the God was testing the Israelite army against their enemies, and chose the chosen leader Gideon. He basically was like, I will lead you to victory, but you need to do everything I say. It's like a story of faith or whatever.
Okay.
And so piece by piece, he has Gideon like basically send most of his army home based on these seemingly kind of arbitrary tests of send them down to the river, and if they drink from their hand, then keep them. If they put if they drink straight from the stream, like with their mouth, then send them home to their family. And eventually he had like 25% or 10% or whatever of his original fighting force. And then God was like, okay, so now give every man a torch, and then give him like a clay jar with a torch inside of it or something like that. And in the middle of the night, they went to attack the enemy, and they didn't have any weapons or anything, but they all had these torches in these clay jars. And then when they got to the enemy, they threw the jars on the ground. It shattered and made a lot of noise, and all of a sudden there was like twice the number of torches. And not every soldier normally carries a torch because they also have to carry a sword. But so because of the number of torches and the amount of noise that was being made, it looked like it was a huge fighting force.
Oh,
and
wow.
the enemy turned on each other and killed each other in their own camp. They didn't need to even have a single sword because the enemy, like, literally was like killing each other because they were so freaked out. So as a like parable, I always kind of saw the Snyder Cut movement as that. You don't have the fighting force to defeat this other army. But like look at Comic-Con. There was like 10 people on the ground in the organized Snyder Cut campaign there. It was hard to get people on the ground. Not to say that nobody on the ground wanted it, but that like from the like organized people who were there explicitly for that purpose, there was not that many. But nobody knew that because there were billboards everywhere. There were people handing out T-shirts. There was a plane flying over. So from anyone,
like a lot more.
Anyone following it from the news was like, "Whoa, this stuff is everywhere." Whereas if someone was on the ground, they were like, "No, I don't see anybody," or they couldn't even find the billboards because they'd have to go like down the street on the highway, whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you're on Twitter, there's a picture of it. You're like, "Whoa, there's billboards all over Comic-Con." Yeah. So it gave us a perception of way more than there was. So that's enough to get $70 million, apparently.
Yeah.
Is that enough to get $250 million? No. What is? A strong response to the Snyder Cut. So to me, I always said, you can get sequels if
you show up.
Like the product itself. Like once it was greenlit, and then you had some other small fights about Zack getting money for reshoots and other stuff like that like fans needed to kind of give him the clout to do. But like once the proper marketing campaign started, and they had the money to target millions of people, all of a sudden the influence of the Snyder Cut army or movement or whatever you want to call it is not relevant in the same way that it was. And that extends out into the second the movie dropped and reviews hit and people reacted to it. If it had gotten a reception like BVS, you are not going to hashtag your way into a sequel. However, you get reviews like you got now. You have a day where organically you get 1 million people saying restore the Snyder Cut, including like verified accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers, organically coming together and saying we want to see more of this. We're excited about the future of the brand. Now you have a shot. So whether or not it'll happen, I don't know. But in terms of like of all the universes in the multiverse, this is the one that has the best shot at getting it to happen. I think is maybe the right way to phrase it.
Yeah. I agree, and I feel like though this time I can just only hope though that like the harassment doesn't have to happen. There's a way to campaign and ask for this stuff without it going into death threats, without it getting personal and vile, and you're trying to track down people's personal information, and it's like there. I can only hope that as we go into the whole restore the Snyderverse, the saner amongst the campaigners are the ones who kind of get the spotlight and are the ones who really kind of push things forward, because it really, I feel like it makes us all look bad. It makes all fans look bad. Yeah. When you start going there, because it really lives up to that unfortunate reputation of we're like these immature geeks who just want our things, and we're just overgrown man babies. And it's like, I just really hope that like the toxic element disappears. Let's focus on productively asking for what we want, using the hashtag, watching the movie, encouraging friends and family to watch the movie, and generally just create such a demand for it that the studio would be ridiculously stupid to not try to continue up on. I mean, they already are coming off ridiculously stupid. Yeah. But like, I feel like if you make enough positive noise, I mean, the funny thing is, earlier that day, Owen Gleiberman, who writes for Variety, he's a critic who's been working for like 35 years already. He wrote this whole thing about how, like, on what planet would you not want more of the Snyderverse? What company would not want to produce more of this when there's all of this like genuine love and passion for this? Because that's something too, like when you're selling a product, the thing you want more than anything are for customers to feel passionately about it, to feel something, to be invested, to have a horse in the race, to be like, oh, I not only like this thing, but I need to tell everyone how much I like this thing so that everyone can see it. And it's like with the Snyder stuff, like they've got a very engaged fan base there that clearly is growing. It is growing, even though the Snyderverse officially ended like 4 years ago in a way, kind of. It's actually grown in popularity because of all of these passionate people. So it's like if you're a company and you have a product and you have all these people who feel this way about your product, why would you treat them this way?
If this is how the product performs as you are actively trying to strangle it,
imagine if they would have tried promoting it.
Yeah, imagine what happened. Because like Warner Brothers didn't even promote the movie.
No, they didn't.
It was paid for by HBO Max. It was promoted by HBO Max, and AT&T and every single AT&T social account pulled out all the stuff. I mean, Looney Tunes was promoting this movie. The TNT account was promoting this movie.
Yeah,
but Warner
the
Brothers
film division just
wanted nothing to do with it. And just imagine what would happen if they would tap into that passion from the fans and like what they could do if they were to wield that in a smart way. It's weird. I think that when it comes to the toxic fans, though, the thing that I'm the most excited about is that, as I said before, I think a lot of the toxicity was kind of the result of that, like, does it exist, does it not exist question. That was like one half of it. And we don't have that this time around. Like, there's no argument about whether, I mean, hopefully, there's always conspiracies, but I don't think anybody's about to make the case that, like, he secretly shot Justice League 2.
Yeah.
And so then so there was always two. I always saw the original Snyder Cut campaign as like kind of two. If you think about it from a sales perspective, you've got to overcome objections from your customer, or from anybody to convince them of something. And so the two objections were it doesn't exist and it wouldn't be good. Or I guess if you want to split it into three, it would be it wasn't very different from the other from the Whedon version. It doesn't exist and it's not good. And so you kind of have to convince. To win someone over, they have to decide, okay, it does exist, I would enjoy it, and it would be drastically different than the other one to the point that justifies doing another cut. And now I think because you don't have as many objections, there's not as much like to fight about.
That's true.
It's strictly, would it be good, or is it worth being excited about? And most people seem to be in favor of that now. Even people that aren't like actively campaigning for it, or I would say the people that actively don't want it to happen are a minority now.
Yeah.
And because of the success of the movie, that's the case. And so, the problem with the toxicity, as we both experienced personally, it was a problem. But also the thing that like never got fully examined and like felt very dishonest about the conversation around toxicity is why it happened or why it existed. And this isn't to apologize.
Yeah, no, I know what you're going to say
for the toxicity, but that these are fans who respond very passionately to this director. I mean, there are people that say Zack Snyder saved their lives.
Yeah,
and that's not like hyperbole. That's like he makes movies about people that touch people in a very personal way. Some people it repels, but other people it inspires them, and literally they say save their lives. And I know some of these people personally who are like, the only reason I made it through 2016 was because I knew Batman v Superman was coming. And that was the only thing I had to look forward to in my life. And then so imagine being that person and then having the response on the internet be what it was. You have two choices, right? Either give up or fight back against the people that are attacking the thing that saved your life.
Yeah. And then you hear what he went through on Justice League and what happened with Autumn, and suddenly becomes this personal battle, right?
Exactly. And the people that are opposed to the movies or opposed to it happening, some people just didn't like it, and that's, and were reasonable about it. But then you had people who would characterize, if you like this, you're a Nazi, or you're it's only alt-right straight white men who like this stuff. And he's got a very diverse fan base. There's so much toxicity in the criticism of the movies and of the fans, and it goes both ways, because some people are being critical of the fans in the way that they are because they've been treated poorly by the fans. But imagine being promised by the studio, oh, hey, you liked these movies. Here's this whole slate that you're going to get. And then one of them doesn't go great. And the people who call you a Nazi convince the studio to can the guy who saved your life. And they erase it with Joss Whedon. You know it exists. They tell you it doesn't exist. You know it would be better. They tell you it wouldn't be better. You know that it could be released. They tell you it won't be released. And then there's this snarky attitude around it. None of the way that people reacted was defensible, but you can understand why there would be a push.
You can see why there would be anger and hostility.
And some people channeled that in a good way and tried to use it to convince people, to show people how they were behaving poorly, or to convince them that, you know, the movie did exist and would be good. But then some people who, I don't know, are a little weaker of character, or of maybe didn't have the communication skill or the friends that they needed to kind of point them in the right direction, did not respond that way. They would say, well, you encouraged the studio to do this to him, and then after they did it to him, you said they didn't do it to him, and then when it was proved they did it to him, you said he deserved it, and then when you finally came to the point where you said, you know what, he didn't deserve it, but we've got all this other stuff that's better to look forward to anyway. Justice League was a step in the right direction. We've got this other stuff that's more exciting to look for. And you're like, but you can't just sweep this under the rug after what you did to him, what you did to his fan base, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the response is, well, you guys are toxic. And it's like, no, that dude is an asshole. And we all know he's an asshole. Like, as a fandom, like, we reject them too, but you're pointing at them and then painting everyone with that brush. And it's so, whenever you get into groupthink and tribalism and all that sort of stuff, it's there's, especially on Twitter, there's no way to have that conversation.
It's impossible.
But there's a lack of empathy, I think, maybe is the bottom line on both sides of fans not being patient or being able to explain their case, and then people just assuming that, like, oh, you like this movie, therefore you support sending death threats to people. So,
but look, I want to end things on a more positive note. And so now let's go here now. Let's say the Snyderverse, they decide that there's one way that they could continue it, or there's one bit of what he teased that they can continue on. You, Steven, what would be like the one thing that you would really want to see continued? Aside from JL2 and 3, like, of all the different threads dropped in there, little plot points or character things, what's the one thing that you would want? Is it a Cyborg movie? Is it the Batman Deathstroke thing? Is it, just like, of the things he teased?
The Affleck Batman stuff, I think, is one of the things that has maybe a lot of the most mainstream support. I think the idea of a nightmare something is what a lot of people are excited for, and I think what he was trying to kind of gin up some excitement for with kind of his reshoots and stuff with Justice League, because if you think about it, that's kind of like, if you're going to do of all of these movies, if you're going to do whatever the minimal budget version is, man, Mad Max style Justice League movie you could do on a shoestring budget. There's still stuff you have to worry about that's gonna, it's not gonna exactly be like a John Wick budget, but let's say they decided to do it as a mini series instead of a movie, and it's set like almost entirely in the nightmare. There's a lot of stuff you could do with that. Shoot it like they did the Mandalorian and in the volume. Like,
I was gonna say that. I'm like, if they could get Snyder a volume, he could make these movies for like half the budget, and then this isn't an issue at all.
He's already, and that's why they liked him in the first place, is because 300.
That's how 300 made him such a huge star too, because it looked amazing, but he did it all on a soundstage, and it was like dirt cheap.
And I think he's never gotten, or I shouldn't say never gotten enough credit, but I think that of the people appreciate that his movies look good, but they don't fully appreciate that, like, they all look way more expensive than they should be. And even like Justice League or let's say BVS, which is so expensive, there's a $300 million movie or whatever. People say that it's even more expensive off the books. But it does way more than most movies of that scope do, and it looks better than they do, and it holds up for longer. So anyway, but the point is that he can do a lot with a little. and I think that he could find a way to do Justice League 2 and 3 that wouldn't require it to be like the question that you're trying to force me into. I could pull a Tarantino. I reject that premise. But I would say some sort of a Nightmare miniseries would be my preference. But if they would just approach the negotiation table, I bet they could find some equitable solutions to finish his story for a lot less than necessary, or for for a big budget and find a way to monetize it. I mean, if they want to, the way they were talking about splitting up the this version of the movie across multiple weeks,
make it an 8-episode thing and get 2 months worth of subs out of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many ways to like a little bit of outside the box thinking could go a long way with him on this, and the stonewalling is the only thing. But
So that's your answer. So if we can get more Snyderverse goodness, you want literally the mainline story he wants to tell. You want to continue down that nightmare path.
Well, it doesn't even have to be the
satisfied.
main. I mean, it could be like, for example, one of the things he was talking about was like what the nightmare was kind of. There's multiple things going on, but like you take the Joker, for example. Mm-hmm. The Joker was being set up to go on he was going to go steal a mother box, and the mother box is what they use to build the cosmic treadmill, and the cosmic treadmill is how Flash comes back to do the am I too soon? Yeah. Lois is the key, all that. Yeah. So speaking of like, take Jared Leto's Joker and just do a Mad Max movie with Jared Leto's Joker as an anti-hero lead.
That'd be cheap.
For
they could do
$30 million, right? I mean, you've already got that Mad Max aesthetic with him, right? He's like a straight up war boy from Fury Road. Get Junkie XL to do that Mad Max score and shoot it in the volume, right? Like you could do so much with that, and that is a quasi mainline story, but does not require you to bite off that whole Justice League 2.
Yeah, and again, it's the multiverse. You label it like DC Black Label, and you continue and you do the Nightmare.
A 4-episode Jared Leto in the post-apocalyptic desert stealing a mother box from Darkseid and Evil Superman, leading a convoy of Batman soldiers, like.
And you get Richard Citrone to basically be the Batman who's in the suit all the time, and you get Ben there for like a day just to do close-ups of him in the cowl, and once again say, "I will fucking kill you." But
right,
like you could minimize Ben's time on set and still tell that story. So I'm with you. Yeah. Okay, so that's your answer for that. But then the last question is, for things that are like not Snyderverse related. Now for the actual future that's been presented, things that have been announced, what is the thing that's on the horizon for DC that you're most, excited to see?
It's weird. I'll say as a Snyder fan, what Ann said in this recent thing kind of diminished a lot of excitement that I have for other projects, because like I said, I can see the puppet strings and it feels very much like Berlanti is the future. Which I'm not into that. However, both what James Gunn is doing with the Suicide Squad and what Matt Reeves is doing with the Batman look really, really cool, and I'm really excited to see that. I think James Gunn is working with a level of budget and grit and sort of creative freedom that he hasn't had before, because more of his edgy stuff has been
I was gonna say it's more budget. His speed to kind of have like more he likes to have like dark humor and violence and things.
Exactly. But when he does that stuff, he's got to work on like a $10 million budget versus when he gets a $200 million budget, it's here's Baby Groot, which is great. But so to say, here's a $250 million budget, and we want the swearing, we want the blood, we want the
full unabashed James Gunn experience.
So that's really exciting. And then I'm a huge Matt Reeves fan. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is one of my favorite movies. I think Robert Pattinson is going to bring something really special to the movie. That first teaser from Fandom was really cool. And so I don't know, it's really hard to be a Batman fan and not be all about that. So so there's definitely stuff coming down the pipeline that's exciting. But when they're talking about plans and they have to precede everything with these qualifiers that are cutting out like if they don't want Snyder, then why would they want more of Matt Reeves, for example? What Matt Reeves is doing seems very much outside of
Yeah, it looks like
what
David
they want to do.
Fincher's
Like,
7 grown up. Yeah.
So
You know what it is for me? The one that I'm most looking forward to, believe it or not, is Black Adam. Because I feel like Dwayne Johnson has been working on this for a while, like developing it behind the scenes. He seems very invested in getting this right. And I was a big fan of Shazam, and I'm very interested in seeing how like Black Adam eventually, you got to assume that they're setting up something where they face each other, right?
Yeah.
And there's also the rumors that like Henry Cavill Superman could potentially fly again in those movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, on it, and with the new news about Dr. Fate and the Justice Society and Hawkman and all that, I just feel like that Black Adam movie is like a sleeper thing right now, where it's like it's far off, so no one's really talking about it. But when you talk about the Justice Society, the way it connects to Shazam, the possibility for Superman, Black Adam could be its own huge pivot point in DC on film in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a good one to bring up, because I'm at this point more curious, because there's 2 versions, especially with it being like a thing that's coming from The Rock. I feel like there's 2 different versions of that movie, 2 drastically different versions of that movie that I don't know which one to expect it to be yet.
Yeah.
And there's the like, he can do the like hardcore R-rated or hard PG-13 or whatever version of this movie. That would be awesome. But also with The Rock, you can get a very comedic, very very tongue-in-cheek, like especially when you're bringing the Justice Society and Hawkman and all that. You could get an awesome version of Hawkman, or you could get like a Taika Waititi, like
so I guess it's going to depend on the tone, right? But I feel like what they showed us at Fandom looked pretty serious. It almost looked Snyderian in a way. Like it had like with the gods and the mythology, it looked a little grandiose. And
exactly. So, that's what's got my curiosity for sure. There's just that part of my brain that's like I always know that there's a chance this turns into like, I love the Jumanji movies, but if you're going to say there's a Jumanji version of this, and there's a I'm trying to think of another Rock movie.
Like a more serious Rock?
That's not Fast and Furious, but I mean, like Pain and Gain is like also very like funny, but also it's got that like hard.
Yes.
But
got an edge to it.
Yeah, but if you're gonna tell me there's 2 different versions of this, and one is like the Jumanji version, which is like, that'd be great, like a Shazam, but with Black Adam.
Yeah. I mean, Shazam is a good example. I guess we're probably hoping that it's not like Shazam's tone, right? The Black Adam movie hopefully has more of a...
I even like Shazam. It's just the fact that it's because it's a story about kids, that it dictates kind of what the content to an extent. And this is not a story about kids, but so how far outside of that kind of template are they going to go? Yeah. And there is a version of Black Adam that I could be very excited about, but it's hard to like... I don't want to get my brain to that point only to have it arrive and be like, oh, I psyched myself out on this one and I should have. Yeah, I got you.
Well, look, any way you slice it, we're sitting at a very interesting sort of like intersection or crossroads here when it comes to like DC's future. And I hope to have you on again as more of this unfolds or develops. Undevelops. I hope to have you on to discuss it, because like I feel like the weeks and months to come, especially after today with the million tweets for Restore the Snyderverse, and we're still fresh off what Ann said. And meanwhile, Justice is Gray just came out earlier today, so there's like a fresh wave of buzz around the black and white version of this movie. Yeah. Like the weeks and months ahead are going to be very interesting. So I hope to have you back on. I really appreciate you coming on. How can people find you over on the Twitter, Stephen?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at smcolbert. And like we said, I write for ScreenRant.com. And so if you are interested in a deeper dive in some of what we talked about here, I have an article up covering a lot of that. I also do a couple podcasts.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, talk about your By the Minute show.
Say maybe we buried the lead on my thoughts on Zack Snyder movies. I co-host... I guess we are at this point. We should just call it the Snyder Minute podcasts. But because we have BVS by the minute, and we are about 95 or so minutes into that. And what it is, we do 1 minute of the movie at a time, which
wild
sounds crazy. We thought it was crazy, but as it turns out, as we got into it, the movie is actually like built that way, whereas it's every minute of the movie is like perfectly packaged for an episode of the show, which is
Wow.
hard to even describe. Like to the point where like for example, not only is the one shot nightmare fight take with Richard Citrone, not only is that a exactly 1 minute long from the beginning to the end of him doing the whole nightmare single take thing.
A minute?
Where it's exactly 1 minute long, climbs out of the truck, fights, the camera goes around the parademons and the helicopter.
Yeah.
So not only is that 1 minute long, it starts right about 0 seconds on that minute and ends right about 59 seconds on that minute. So it's not like it's cut off halfway between the episode.
Yeah.
And that is very, very common that happens. And we're doing Justice League by the minute now also.
That's going to be a long one. It's a 4-hour movie.
But I've been looking ahead, and even like later, like the entire third act divides up almost perfectly to the point of like Barry's run is going to be its own standalone episode. We're not cutting Barry's Speed Force run in half.
Amazing.
And that kind of thing. And so it's crazy to know that and we asked Snyder about it, and he basically said like, well, he doesn't like do it with a stopwatch, but the fact that it divides up so cleanly is like not by accident, because he's so meticulous with the way he constructs this stuff. So anyway, point is, it's fascinating. If you want to just for the how does that work, like definitely check those out at snyderminute.com.
Yeah, so you got BVS by the minute, Justice League by the minute. Now you're going to go back and do Man of Steel by the minute when that's over, right?
Eventually, we've been talking about that, but we got to workload is always a thing. But Man of Steel is coming eventually for sure.
And you'll appreciate this actually, because you saying that every minute kind of has plenty to say about it too, and it really the way that works out. To me, it reminds me of like earlier this week, I was raving. Listen to this sentence. I was raving about Zack Snyder's Justice League to my mom. And in talking to her about it, and by the way, she's super, I fanboyed the hell out of her. And now I gave her like a live fanboy podcast on the drive home the other day.
Nice.
And she's like all locked in and ready. But one of the compliments I gave Snyder, and that's why to me, it's not so peculiar that you could do the podcast that you're doing, is that everything means something. Everything in every shot is deliberate. Nothing is by accident. Everything has some other meaning or a reason for being there. And I told my mom about that because she's like me too. Like she loves to try to look for the poetic sort of meanings behind things, or why is this shot this way, or why are they holding that thing, or whatever, And like a lot of filmmakers, you don't really get the sense that like they put thought into every, like, why is that mug in that corner of the frame? With Snyder, you get the sense that every single thing you see was done for a reason. And if you want to like pause it and examine it, you'll find out what that thing is.
Yeah. And people are always shocked that we're able to do that with our podcast. And I think we were just as much as everyone, where like we need to hold back with what we talk about every minute to avoid mining like future minutes too much, because of the point where we're like, you look at a single, like you go into Lex's office, for example, in Batman v Superman, and in the architecture and the decorations and the all the different things going on, we could examine his entire character arc in the entire movie with just the set dressing in there. And so we got to say like, okay, let's just talk about the parts of this that apply to this minute, because otherwise we're going to get later and remember when we talked about this? Well, just cross apply. But it's been fascinating, and our listeners tend to agree, so we appreciate that.
Yeah. Yes. And that goes up when? What day of the week do you put up your by the minute?
That's the sore subject.
Oh, so it floats. Okay, listen, mine floats too. My show doesn't always arrive on Friday either.
We try to do like Mondays and Fridays, and we stick to it pretty consistently. But we both got young kids, and so finding time to record and then edit and then get it all up is a little bit inconsistent. But generally Monday and Friday, we're taking a brief hiatus on BVS as we get Justice League up and running. But I think the intention eventually is going to be, for a while, we'll do Justice League Monday, Friday, and BVS on Wednesdays.
Okay.
So once all the wheels are greased and rolling, hopefully people have 3 episodes a week, which is kind of crazy to think about that we've gotten to that point. But yeah,
I like it. And one thing, since I'm just thinking about this now, like I keep trying to wrap us up, but I just like having you on. But like in Batman versus Superman, for example, in the scene where Clark and Bruce meet at that function, right?
Hmm.
Um, like I remember when I went back and watched the Ultimate Edition, and I decided, you know, because and enough people had come through to me and said, no, you need to give these movies another chance. Snyder's very meticulous and is very detail oriented, whatever. When I went back and finally revisited it, I even noticed something as subtle as like the little piano music that's playing in the background when Clark and Bruce meet, like the jazz song. It's night and day.
Hmm.
And what do we always say? You know, Batman is like night and Superman is the light. And,
Yeah.
you know, and of course, night and day is playing when Bruce and Clark meet. Like all throughout all the movies. I mean, that's a very sort of obvious example, I guess.
Yeah.
But I feel like overall, like every single thing was chosen. And
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
appreciate the hell, even if I don't love everything that's chosen, the fact that this filmmaker cares this much about the story he's telling innately makes me care more, you know?
Exactly. You've got something very similar to that with like Justice League, where the Nick Cave and the Bad Seed song that plays when Aquaman comes out of the bar and goes down
Yeah.
the pier and it's slow motion, um, is so it's there is a kingdom, and there is a king, and so obviously that kind of that
Yeah.
on its nose kind of applies to him. But the thing that my co-host Andrew Dice pointed out that really blew my mind about that is that um, I guess that's a little bit of a downer. But Nick Cave is known for talking, like his uh, talks that he's given and things that he's written about, like dealing with grief as a parent,
Mm.
because he lost his child at the age of 15, his son, whose name was Arthur. Um,
Oh, wow.
and so there's a lot of stuff where you look at it and you know that there's two, the song that plays when they told us our gods would outlive us,
Hmm.
with day distant skies, I think is what it's called.
Something like that. Yeah.
That plays when Lois walks down, that's also them, and that's about that's
Mm.
people say it's a husband and a wife dealing with loss. And so it's like, wow, did he choose those after everything that happened?
Yeah.
um, because they fit so well, but there's meaning, and not just meaning to like the characters and the plot in the moment, but also like there's a personal meaning to Snyder also, and that is a typical minute to
Yeah.
minute thing that you find where it's like, how is there's so much in the DNA of every frame that yeah.
Yeah. So, well, you know what? This Zack Snyder guy's pretty darn good. Who knew? You know, I would
Yeah.
really love to see more of his DC work. Hopefully,
Yeah,
someone will restore the Snyderverse.
that'd be pretty great.
But for now,
If not, he's
Steven,
got other cool stuff going on too, though, so that's
yes,
exciting.
he does. I'm very much looking forward to Army of the Dead. But Steven, thank you so much for coming on the Fanboy this week. This has been great. I feel like we gave people more than enough to
Yeah.
to chew on here, and there's going to be a lot more to talk about. So let's do this again sometime, right?
Perfect. Thanks.
Steven's a good dude. What can I say? He's good people. You know, that conversation lived up. I've been trying to get him on for a while. Or rather, I should say I've been trying, but I've had it in the back of my mind for months that I would love to have Steven on. And finally, the stars aligned. It happened. We had our big talk about the Snyder Cut. And look, it's been a hell of a week. It's been 8 days. It's been a week now. 8 days when you get this episode. But for me, it's been a week since I saw Zack Snyder's Justice League after all these years, and it's been a real sort of roller coaster ride because again, I'm very intrigued and I find myself very interested in where he was going. And that's so funny because exactly 5 years ago tonight, in fact, at this exact time, because right now it's 12:18. It's just past midnight on Thursday night. It's the early hours of Friday. And at this exact time, 5 years ago, I was sitting upstairs in my office chair filming a video review for the theatrical cut of Batman vs. Superman because I saw it the Thursday preview night and then came home and recorded about it. So right now, as we speak, I'm living the 5-year anniversary of BVS. And if you would have told the me of back then that I'd be sitting here lamenting the fact that we're not going to get to see where Snyder was taking things, I would have laughed in your damn face. But it's funny because I just re-uploaded that video review. It's like 23 minutes long. If you want to go back and revisit where I was 5 years ago tonight, you can find that at the Superman on Film YouTube channel, which you should totally be subscribed to, by the way. But yeah, folks, I hope you enjoyed this week's show. I hope you'll consider leaving me a positive review. It's been a lot of fun bringing this show back a few months and having this fuel my desire to kind of get back into the game again and start writing columns and finding out information about these movies and, you know, discussing these things with you in a more full-throated way after I needed about 1.5 years away to just sort of recharge my batteries. And part of that, again, is getting Superman on Film ready. Superman on Film will be ready by April 18th of this year, so we're less than a month away. We're about 3 weeks away from the site going live, and I've been working feverishly for the last few days, just kind of working on getting the site in order and the branding and the type of content, and, you know, I've been reaching out to people, and it's just, this is the fun part. I'm kind of like getting the airplane ready. We're getting onto the runway, and soon we're going to take off. But for now, be sure to visit. You know, the site is already up. It's supermanonfilm.com with a hyphen between each word. Superman-on-film.com. You can already go have a look at just the placeholder site that's there. And guess what? There is a merchandise store there where you can get yourself some The Fanboy Podcast loot. You can get some mugs and COVID masks and t-shirts and hoodies. Anything you want is going to be there, and I'm going to be taking a lot more advantage of that. Like there's even there is a Life is Chaos, Be Kind design that you can get on just about any kind of merchandise you could think of. A lovely gift for the woman in your life. Or just a great reminder for you, because listen, these are good, important words. But so yeah, you know, I just wanted to mention that Superman on Film has been very top of mind this week, and I really hope you guys are excited for it. A lot of the early buzz I'm hearing from the folks who heard that I'm about to launch a Superman-centric news site, a lot of the reactions are unbelievably positive, and I'm so grateful that you guys are appreciative of my Superman fandom, and that you're willing to let my voice kind of, you know, enter the community, so to speak, as somebody who loves Superman and has a lot to say about any scrap of information about him. So Superman on Film is rapidly approaching. You could find us on social for now too. You could follow Superman on Film on Twitter, all one word, also at Instagram, and on Facebook, Superman on Film. So follow us across all the socials. Tell your friends. Superman on Film is coming. It's going to be a damn good time. I hope you thought episode 130 was a damn good time. And until next week, life is chaos. Be kind. Adios.